Welcome to VFS Confidential. This is all about video games today. I am Victor Lucas from the Electric Playground, and it is an awesome honor to be here with you all today. We have a special show with an incredible guest. He's come all the way from Winnipeg through Seattle to land here with us in Vancouver to talk Destiny and video games. This is the project lead for Destiny 2, Mr. Mark Noseworthy. Come on up, Mark. Hello, sir. Thanks. Welcome. Welcome. So this is a room filled with people that I think want your job. So if you feel a little uncomfortable, don't worry about it. These
I don't know.
people are
We're
also
about
nice.
2 months from being finished on Destiny 2 right now. I don't think many people in this room want my job right now.
Tell us what this final 2 months is like right now. How is your life, your day-to-day?
Not so busy that I couldn't come here today, but like I used to live in Vancouver. I've got friends here, and I wanted to just take a weekend to myself and my family. But it's intense. Like the pressure of making a game that millions of people are going to enjoy and play it takes a toll on you. Like for me and the team, it's an obsession. Like we think about it all the time. Like I'm sure in the middle of this interview, at various points, I'm going to be thinking of problems that we're trying to solve, and like how can we get to that thing, or like, how do we tighten up the graphics on level 3 or whatever. But the last couple months are really about just putting the finishing touches on the recipe. Like I think of making a game sometime like cooking, and it's like a chili, and like you're tasting the chili as you're making it, and then does this need a little bit more paprika, and like what can you do to just make sure it's really good. And we're putting the last few ingredients in, and
I'm sure all of your teammates are very happy that you call them ingredients. That's nice.
Well, the teammates aren't ingredients; it's the game. It's the game design that are in the ingredients, and what's the right way to just finish it as strong as you can. Because I don't know, Miyamoto said something like this once about like a bad game is bad forever, and so like once it comes out, that's Destiny 2 forever. And of course, there's live support. You can patch the game, you can make improvements, but like you're going to leave that impression forever.
Absolutely.
Right, and so that certainly weighs on you, makes you think like, well, if I could put a couple more hours in and make a difference, like I should do that, and so that's how it feels right before you ship something.
Well, thank you for being here with us.
Yeah.
As all that pressure is churning inside of you, I think that's amazing. But it's been a long road from, your dreams of being in games to now being on a team of how many people?
At our peak, maybe around 700
people
making Destiny 2.
That's incredible. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. But I want to talk first about your roots and your first kind of realizations that games is where you wanted to, point your life towards.
Yeah, my dad was in the RCMP. I'm Canadian. I grew up in Winnipeg, as I said, and since I was a young boy, up until about 8 or 9, I wanted to be an RCMP like my dad. Like, who doesn't like worship their father or whatever? And I was like, well, of course that's what I'm going to do. And 2 of my uncles were in the RCMP as well, and so that's what's going to happen. And I didn't. Video games were something I understood in the 80s, but wasn't really into, because like the Atari and the ColecoVision and television, they just weren't very good. Like I would rather play in the yard with my friends, play hockey or chase each other with sticks or whatever.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember this moment when I went to a friend's house, and it was sometime in the mid-late 80s. I walk around the corner and he's playing the Nintendo, which I'd never seen before, and he was playing the original Castlevania. And I was just like, my mind was just blown. I'm like, what is this? This isn't Arkanoid or some Pong or whatever. This was like a world. This was a place you could be in, and I was just blown away. And I was like, I need this in my life. Like immediately, like of course, begging my parents to get a Nintendo, and from that point forward, I was just obsessed with video games. Like I just like, no, I want to do this. Like, oh, sorry, Dad, you may be my hero, but I think I'm so passionate and care about games so much. Like I want to enjoy my life. I want to enjoy going to work. I want to wake up in the morning and want to go to work. And so I looked at game design schools. Like at that point, there was one prominent game design school in Vancouver, actually. The DigiPen used to be here. Mm-hmm. And so I applied to DigiPen and got in, and was gonna, instead of doing traditional, college education, I'm gonna go for games, because this is what I want to do, right? But then DigiPen moved to Seattle, and because I was Canadian and they moved to the U.S., you can't go to school in a different country unless you have a visa, and you can't do that unless that place is accredited. long story short, I couldn't go to DigiPen in Seattle. Ultimately, I decided, well, because I had a bad taste in my mouth with that. I'm like, well, I was gonna go to this program, and then it kind of fell apart, and I sort of felt like they screwed me a little bit. So I made a pact with myself. I said, I'm gonna go to university. I went to the University of Manitoba, and I studied finance and marketing and like commerce essentially. So I'm gonna get my 4-year degree, get some fundamentals about of business. And then I'm going to give myself a couple years to try to get into games, no matter what I got to do. If I got to move to Tokyo or have to wash dishes in Vancouver or something, that's what I'm going to do and just try to get into the industry. Give myself a couple years, use that basic education I have to just try to get my foot in the door somewhere doing just about anything.
So what was your first gig then? What was your first professional job that you had making video games?
So getting out of school, I applied everywhere I could because I looked at any job that looked like it was entry level and applied for it, whether it was a design position, a test position, or production, and got rejections pretty much everywhere across the board because I didn't have any experience. It's this vicious circle. Well, until you have experience, you can't be considered, but you can't be considered without experience. Well, how does this work? And it works by, well, eventually there's some place that's willing to take a risk on you, essentially, and you have a set of skills that maps closely enough to that, or you've made a connection that gets your foot in the door. And so my first job in games was at Nokia. So Nokia in 2003 was, our phones weren't always as powerful as they were now, but Nokia was one of the first companies that was trying to merge gaming and cell phone technology. And
I don't think anybody here is going to remember the N-Gauge.
Yeah,
You're going to have to really explain this one.
There was this device they shipped that looked like a taco called the N-Gauge, and they set up a publishing team here in Vancouver, and they
used to have a huge booth at E3 too. Man.
Oh, it was crazy.
They had so much money to do this.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, because Nokia was incredibly successful in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And so they. So they set up a publishing team here to try to find third-party developers to make content, and they needed a games analyst. And in 2002, 2003, pretty much all I did in my free time, aside from playing video games, was reading video game websites, on forums, trying to get NPD reports on NeoGAF, whatever, and just nerd out all over this stuff, right? And I had a background where I was good at running numbers and math and statistical models and stuff because of school, and they needed someone to come into their team and do reports and go to trade shows and tell them what was happening in the games industry and make PowerPoints and stuff. I'm like, well, I can do that, and so I thought I was qualified for that. It wasn't what I wanted. Ultimately, I wanted to make video games, and this was on the publishing side. But I knew if I could get this credit, if I could get in there, I would meet other people. I would suddenly have a resume that doesn't say works at Blockbuster Video, but works in the video games industry, and works at Blockbuster, loves video games, and so I try to just get my foot in the door.
You did have an interesting resume, though. You were telling me a little bit about that.
Because I didn't do design, I didn't do engineering or art. My resume didn't scream game developer. It was like all this business stuff, accounting and boring stuff, right? And so I needed people to believe that I was a gamer. And so I changed my resume and I made the top of my resume say my top 5 gaming accomplishments. And I called out a few things that I had done, like how I'd beaten Street Fighter 2 Turbo on the Super NES on the highest speed and the highest difficulty against M. Bison in 7 seconds. I just ruined him this one time, and I felt good about that. And so I put that there, and what other things I thought were cool. And the guys at Nokia, who I'm still good friends with, one of them's right here with me in the front row, they saw the resume and they were like, man, this guy's hilarious. He's clearly a gamer. He's not just some suit. And they thought it was awesome. And it was one of the reasons they called me, because they had tons of people who can run numbers and go to trade shows and write reports. But they're like, here's a guy who's so into games, he's telling you at the top.
He's in it for more than anything.
Yeah.
He loves games.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go back to education here in a second, because obviously this applies to many in this room right now. But how would you have received that resume now as a project lead for Destiny? Could a resume like that get you a job in the game business now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's for the right role, right? In fact, I don't think there's a single role that's not cool to read. like that's just interesting. You get to see what someone's into, what they enjoy, right? What they're proud of. Like what type of accomplishments was he talking about? Like,
do you get resumes like that? Do you have achievement
almost
scores and stuff?
I've seen achievement score a couple times.
Yeah.
But it's pretty rare. Like normally it's just like, here's my like robotic background, right? And maybe in the CV, like the thing where you write the flowery letter or whatever, they say stuff, but like you sort of assume everyone's passionate about games, but like but one of the things I find out in an interview right away is like, so what games are you playing? And let's talk about them. And can you talk intelligently about games? And are you actually passionate? Because everyone will say like, I'm passionate about games. Yeah. But, like, do you really think about, prove it. Do you really think about them, you know?
That was one of the things that shocked me as I started my career covering games, is I would be interviewing a lot of executives, and I would find out a lot that people weren't playing, and they didn't really sort of take it home with them, and it was shocking to me. But I feel like there is definitely a sea change that's happening, and more people at every level are invested in games in major ways now.
You know, certainly at Bungie, like one of the things we're looking for is passion. It doesn't mean you have to be like super into Halo or Myth or even Destiny. We hire people who don't play Destiny,
right?
But they have to really care about games, right? And certainly, you know, doing something creative with your resume is a way you can stand out, right?
It's not just a job.
Yeah.
And so that's something that you would pass on to somebody thinking about a career in video games. It's not just something that you can take those skills and just apply them in this direction. Generally, you want people that have real, you know, passion for this, that really sort of get home and still keep playing and have an attachment to it.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's, you know, it's for a lot of us, it's a calling. It's like what you want to do, right? And the more you can get that across, like the way I actually transitioned, like when I worked at Nokia, I felt it was a job and it was cool. I was in the games industry, but I wasn't making video games.
Yeah.
Like I really wanted to work on a developer.
Right.
You know, one of the ways I was able to do that was get across my passion to someone else in person. So when I was still in university, I applied for a scholarship with the IGDA. They have these scholarships every year. They get, you know, a free pass to the Game Developers Conference, like a 3-day pass. So I applied for this and wrote an essay or whatever and got it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the Game Developers Conference and like meet some real game developers. And this is before even Nokia.
Yeah.
And I went down and I got to meet all these people, and you go to these parties or you just meet folks in the hotel lobby, and they're like game designers or engineers that you've like read about for years, and you just get to talk to them. And that was really cool and whatever, and inspiring. Like the best part of GDC, I think, is how inspired you are when you leave.
Yeah. But
I went to the recruiting booth, and Radical Entertainment had a recruiting booth at the time, and I didn't really know them that well. But you know, I went and talked to everyone there, and I ended up talking to one of the guys working in the booth who was a designer at Radical. And we just started chatting, and I was telling him about how much I love games and how I was trying to get in the industry, and how Gran Turismo 3 at that time was my bag, and my dad and I like built this thing in our house where we could, like, you know, because we bought the steering wheel and you could like plug it in, and really felt like just like a crappy cockpit, but it was fun to do, and it was just more fun to play. And
because he's that your dad was there too with you playing these games, so he must have thought
a little bit. You know, he was more just trying to support my, you know, passion there.
That's great.
But and he would play it a little bit with me, and so. Like I was talking to him about this, and he was a car nut and whatever, and you get to see the passion that I had for games. And then here I was from Winnipeg, then he was from Winnipeg, and ultimately we became friends and we traded email addresses, and it never resulted in me getting a job at Radical. Like I got a tour there, and that was cool, but like I didn't get a job there.
Yeah.
But we kept in touch, and we eventually, I was like, hey man, I'm moving out to Vancouver. I got a job at Nokia, and he's like, oh, that's awesome. And we'd see each other once in a while here and there. And about a year after working at Nokia, you know, he called me up one day and he's like, hey, I got a friend who works at Relic Entertainment.
Right.
And they're looking for like an entry-level production position, like a, you know, assistant producer, like low man on the totem pole. But like, you know, you're really into games, Mark, and I think this is what you said you want to do. Would you like me to introduce you to, you know, the producer over there? And he did. And it was because I got across to this guy, David was his name.
Yeah.
I got across my passion for games to him.
Yes.
And that stuck with him, you know. And then, you know, through that, you know, chance encounter at the booth that day, a year later, it ended up paying off for me.
See, this is what's so important about, you know, this information that you're relaying today. You know, there's a couple things to learn from this. One of them is that this is a big industry, but it's a small industry. And a lot of the relationships that we connect with early in our career end up being relationships that we have for the entirety of our career. Mm-hmm. And you may not end up working directly with those people, but they become real friends and real colleagues, and they do open doors for you that you may not otherwise expect or know that those would be available to you.
Yeah, like be nice to everybody.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is that the companies that you dream you want to work for, or games that you want to work on, are made by people, and they're not just these big monolithic establishments. And once you start to go to GDC, and I would absolutely encourage any student that's into this space to save up the money to get to GDC, because you will make some of these lifelong friends there. Yeah. And they will give you all kinds of really cool opportunities. But something else that has changed, I think, is that there are now, reputable schools. We're in one.
Yes.
And you have a lot of students that have come through the VFS School of Game Design that work with you. Yeah. Tell me about your thoughts now as a veteran game maker about these schools, and specifically your sort of connections to VFS.
Yeah, at Relic we worked with, when I left Nokia, I went to Relic Entertainment. They used to just be down the street here. We had several VFS grads we had a lot of grads from the game design program that, worked on our RTS games, and they were awesome. And at Bungie, we have a bunch of artists, and I've worked with several artists from VFS. They're tremendous, they're top notch, it's world class. Like, you guys are producing world class game developers here. And if I was finishing high school now, or I'd finished an undergrad program and I was trying to get into games, or I wanted to get the skills that I just couldn't get in my basement myself, I would be all over something like VFS.
I've got a theory about what VFS sort of offers all of the students, and it's really about the cross-discipline sort of communication and the opportunities to kind of mingle and mesh with all kinds of different, interests. But I'm curious to hear what you would say to students, about their dream and their sort of their expectations and their goals to work in a field like yours.
I think, you unless you're making an indie game by yourself, right, which is totally viable for probably many people in this room, which is amazing now.
Right.
That games have changed that much, that you can actually make something on your own and release it. You've got to really have a lot of humility and be able to work with others, and collaborate, and to not always assume that you're right, that you've got it figured out, and that together, you're going to be better than you are apart. And synergy, the idea of 1 + 1 is 3 or whatever, is really true in a team environment. If you're, an engineer, programmer, and you have some art skill, chances are that indie project you're going to make is going to be better if you're working with an artist. They're going to help you. They're going to make better art than you're going to do on your own. And so that ability to work with others and to really listen and to have a level of humility in that collaboration, I think, is really important. And to leave the ego behind.
Would you say that that's something that you would, encourage people to sort of develop in the written word? Because you're on Slack, you're on email and stuff like that, and I feel like I've been in big team environments and stuff as well along the way, and so much can be misconstrued, and the ego can sort of mess things up sometimes, and things can be taken the wrong way. Is that something to develop, your language skills and your ways to communicate inside of a team?
Absolutely. I think, with digital communication, it's honestly, it's hard to get across your true self, right? And with email, with IM, with text messages,
the dangers of Twitter,
social media, things get taken the wrong way easily, because you don't get a sense of the tone and the earnestness behind a statement, right? And so, in even an environment as big as Bungie, where hundreds of people, sometimes you need to send an email to 700 people, but if you can talk face to face, that face to face connection is just so much more powerful and more important than an email. If you can not send the email, you can sit down with them and talk about it and explain it. They're gonna believe more. They're gonna want to hear what you're saying, even that difficult message or that inspiring message. How inspiring can an email be?
Yeah.
I've sent a couple emails where people have replied in my life were like, "This is really awesome, man. I want to run up the hill with you." A couple, right? And I've sent millions of emails, and so. But you can have a conversation with someone in the hallway, outside the kitchen about "Hey man, that thing's really great. What's happening next?" And then they walk away and they've got a little hop in their step, that face to face, nothing beats it.
You don't get to where you are without a lot of mistakes, though, right? Can you tell us about maybe some misunderstood bit of communication or some other stumble or fumble that you may look back on with a little bit of regret, but you learned from?
Oh man, I don't know. Yeah. Most of them just involve like more like personal life stuff, like you know, like where you are like just not like you send an email to the wrong person.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if you've ever done that or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you said something in a way that like you shouldn't have said it. You know, you weren't being the best version of yourself. Right. And so that happened a couple times early in my career, and then you know you feel like incredible shame and regret after it. And so now, like when I send an email, I would think like, okay, pretend this is going to go to my manager, you know, my wife, my mom, the Pope, like pretend it goes to a bunch of people. Like, would I be proud about what this says or whatever? And if you're not, you're like, maybe I shouldn't send, or maybe I need to rewrite this thing, you know? Or, and it's not always because you're saying something shameful or embarrassing, but maybe you're just not being clear, you know?
Right.
And so that certainly happened in my personal life a bunch, and that's informed me in the office, like when I'm, you know, working in a team environment a lot, you know? Like professionalism is important.
What would you say to young you if you were your boss? Like if you started at Bungie and you were an employee of yours or a junior team member of yours, what would you say to them?
I'm trying to think about, like, because I've got notes where, you know, like how do I onboard someone? You know, when you got someone joining your team, I've got like, I collect a set of notes and processes that I try to train and improve over the years. Yeah. So that, and I'm trying to go in my head, like, what are some of the things I say to them? I think a lot of it is about, like, you're never going to make a better first impression than right at the beginning, you know? And, like, when you get that opportunity, like, you have to try as hard as you can at the beginning. Like, if someone's first couple weeks on the job, they're, like, just kind of doing okay, their, like, next 6 months aren't going to be awesome. They're not going to go from like being mediocre to being amazing, like
on their own.
On their own, right? And so you really want to put your best foot forward right at the beginning, and I don't want anyone to think that means like, oh, you got to work like crazy hard, and because you hear all these stories about people crunching in the games industry and chained to their desks and whatever, and it's not all like that. We certainly work hard.
Not as much anymore, right?
You know, it changes from place to place.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's about like use your time well. Right? You know, if you're going to be in from 9 to 6 working on a game, like make sure you're working. You know, make sure like, are you doing the most important things? Right? When I've always thought of myself in terms of my relationship with my managers, like I don't ever want to be a burden to my boss. Yeah. Right? And how do I do that? Like, how do I got to make sure that he always or she always thinks, you know, that thing I've given to Mark, like it's going to be taken care of. Yeah. You know, he's going to do it as good or better than I would do it. Yeah. And how do you make sure you do that? And so, like, you gotta, you know, when you're given an opportunity, you have to make the most of it, and you know, use every minute of the day trying to, you know, push that forward. Awesome.
Let's talk about Relic for a second here. This is an acclaimed studio out of Vancouver. I'm sure we've got some fans of their games in that studio in the audience right now. But they made a game called The Outfit, which I don't know if many people are going to remember. It was not one of their most prestigious games, but it was a very cool Risk, and you were there for that game. What was your role on The Outfit?
Yeah, so I started as assistant producer on The Outfit, so it was my first, like, I would say, like, real game development job. Right. And then ended the project just slightly a little more senior, but we developed it for a couple years. Yeah, so I was in production, so I was, you know, helping the engineering team originally, you know, develop the new tech that we were, you know, ultimately the game started with Company of Heroes engine and Impossible Creatures.
So for those that don't know, this was an RTS studio, real-time strategy studio that had really kind of perfected with, had Dawn of War 1 already shipped at that point?
Yeah, Dawn of War 1 had just shipped.
And Company of Heroes. And
Company of Heroes was later, so they had Homeworld, you know, and then they had Impossible Creatures, and then they had Dawn of War, and so RTS was their jam.
They're
so really good at it. And
they're still amazing.
You know, and they wanted to say, hey, let's branch out from RTS. Let's kind of make an action game. Yes. You know, or first it was like, let's bring the RTS to console, and that, you know, and they explored that for a while, and it was like
still impossible.
You know, and it's still, you know, it wasn't. And then as they got it going, like, you know, we really want direct control of these guys. This would be more fun. So they turned it into a third-person action game. And we had to take the technology they had, which was built for PC, and then get it to run on a console, with limited memory and different CPU and everything, and make it work with a controller. And so it was a really big engineering investment for them. And so I joined them originally producing the engineering team and helping those guys, get it done, running on the Xenon, which was like the prototype name for the Xbox 360.
Right.
Which wasn't announced yet.
It was a launch game.
It launched window. We called it launch window.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
It was supposed to come out and launch, and we didn't quite get there, but it shipped around March time frame, around Oblivion, and Oblivion crushed us. But
what?
It was Oblivion. Come on.
Yeah, it crushed everything. Yeah. Was it a stressful time to be there, to see the company try to kind of figure out this new format? Or was it just exciting for you?
I was just so excited to be working in video games, right? And to be working on the next Xbox that wasn't announced, and to go to meetings where we're playing the game, like all these things that you heard of as a kid. Like, can you imagine you play games all day long? That's totally not what happens, and I'm sure anyone here working game projects knows that's not how games are made. But I was just so excited.
That's how games are not made, actually.
Yes. And there comes a point. We're playing a lot of Destiny 2 right now.
Yeah.
So it was just really exciting. Like I didn't, I'm sure maybe the GM of Relic at the time felt tons of stress and pressure, and the producer of the game. But I was just excited to be making games and trying to, because I was learning. How do you get artists and designers and engineers to work together to make an experience, and make it run fast and make it fun and get it together so you can have a demo, and get it together so you can have a beta, and then get it so you can ship. And so I worked a bunch, but it was all inspired. I just wanted to be there. Like, what if 2 extra hours of my day today can make the game a little bit better? Like, I want to do that. I would just have fond memories, and I think everyone who worked on that team, and maybe this is true of almost every game project, but we look back on it fondly. Like there were tough times there, where the technology's not working, or challenges with the game design, or you just couldn't get those people you needed. There's a group on Facebook for us, the Outfit dev team. We still talk and stuff now and then.
That's awesome.
And because some people still get letters from fans, and there's still 500 people playing it or something.
That's great.
Through emulation now. And so, I think for a lot of us, it was our first game. There were several Relic veterans came in, but Relic also staffed up and brought on a lot of new folks, and a lot of us were fresh out of school and game design programs and art programs. A lot of people, and so for a bunch of us, it was our first game. Learning okay, how does the sausage get made?
Yeah. Well, you went to real-time strategy sausage after that, though.
Yeah.
For a good chunk of time.
Yeah.
How long were you in real-time strategy?
So after the Outfit shipped, I went and helped the team that was working on Company Heroes for several years, just to help them close. Sometimes it takes a village to get a game done.
Yeah.
And so some of us from the Outfit joined them.
So that was the first Company of Heroes.
Yeah, it was the first Company Heroes, which is
game.
Still, I think, the highest rated RTS
of
all
amazing
time. It was great.
Experience.
People still talk about it. People at Bungie still play it over lunch hour. It's a great game. So I just helped them a little bit get it done. And then from there, my next role was the producer, the production lead on Dawn of War 2. So Dawn of War was this great, really great success for Relic, and we wanted to follow it up with a sequel, but we wanted it to be different, and wanted to be similar but different, and where we were going to take it. And Relic had been making expansion packs for a while for the original Dawn of War, and so we built a new team and tried to innovate in that space.
Well, I mean, Relic has proven itself to be one of the jewels in game development. That's a long career of really fantastic games. But the disciplines you were learning in real-time strategy, I'm curious to see how they applied to your new role at Bungie, because your first game there was with Halo Reach, which is also kind of a remarkable game to start at a new company with.
Yeah, in a bunch of ways. Most of the skills transfer. Certainly game design is different, and that's not my thing. Of course, I'm a gamer, and I talk to the designers all the time, and I give them feedback and whatever. But for production, it's largely about interpersonal, planning, organizing, risk management, leadership. getting people to talk, like being in a meeting and seeing two people say something and they're both nodding and they think they're agreeing with each other, but you can see that they're not.
Right.
Right. You can see the thing that they're not talking about, the thing that's unspoken, and then you have to raise that, or you have to regurgitate to them, well, this is what I think the plan is. Then that's when you see the disagreement. And whether you're making an RTS or Mario or Halo Reach,
right,
it's still the same thing.
Is there a common thing that you've seen, that a common disconnect, from game to game, from team to team?
I don't really think so.
Yeah.
I don't think there are any grand patterns of how that kind of stuff manifests. But it's just a fundamental nature of people being together, right?
Yeah.
Two people go in a room, they both want what they want, and they're going to try to leave that room getting the thing that they want. And I think people struggle to hear others.
Sometimes it's actually not always artists versus programmers?
No.
Not always?
Sometimes it's just two artists, right? Sometimes it's two producers, right? And people, communication is hard. Really candid, honest communication. People don't want to disappoint others. Most people don't like to make others feel uncomfortable. And so there's like this dance that people do when they're talking to each other, right? To not hurt each other's feelings or to not expose themselves or whatever. And a producer's job often is to like see that, right? And like call it out, right? So, whether you're making an RTS or whether you're making a first-person shooter, a lot of that is the same.
Yeah.
I think if you get more discipline specific and you talk about art is different. Like making small little, dreadnought war machines with incredible detail, but they're tiny and they're 10,000 polygons is different than making, a giant battle cruiser in a space mission in Halo Reach. They are different. They both use the same programs and whatever, but like the fidelity is different, or the scale and scope of production can be different.
But from your vantage point,
it's pretty similar.
It was a transition you could make. But I want to talk a little bit about Relic to Bungie. Were you ready to be done with Relic, or was the offer at Bungie good? What was the decision? Because it wasn't just a game company change. You moved to a different country. Yeah, it was really two things for me. One, RTS isn't what I'm passionate about as a gamer.
Oh, okay. I was excited to make video games, and it was really happy to work at Relic, and I love Relic. I would work there again. I still have a bunch of friends there. They are awesome. You should try to get a job at Relic. But I didn't want to continue making RTSs for another 5 years.
Right.
And they had another console team that spooled up to make Space Marine, and that team was staffed, and and so it was like when I looked at my future, it was like make more Dawn of War until we make a Dawn of War 3.
Right.
And like that could be satisfying, but like I wanted more. Like I wanted to work on a game that I wanted to play in my free time.
Right.
When Dawn of War 2 was done, I played it for a couple of days and then I was done. Often when you finish a game, you don't want to look at it. You're just done with it. You don't want to touch it. And I still wanted to play. The games that were formative for me growing up were like Final Fantasy or Metroid or Mario or Zelda, and I wanted to make something more like an action game. And so I was looking at that. And the second thing was THQ owned Relic in the late 2008, 2009, and they weren't doing super well. And we were on the Titanic, and you could see the iceberg, And I was like, I'm gonna get off this ship before there's a panic. And so it was kind of a combination of those things. I wanted to. I also felt like I'd learned what I could learn about game development, about production, making RTSs at Relic, but there was more out there. I remember I think it was the fall of 2007. Yeah. And I think Modern Warfare came out that year.
Right.
Portal, Super Mario Galaxy. These were some incredible games. And I'm playing them at home, and I'm just like, I can't believe how good these games are. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I had no idea how they made this. Like, I had no idea how they made Portal. And I could read articles and whatever. I just mean, like, there's things about game development, about production, and how a thing like that's put together that I just don't understand.
Right.
I know how we make Dawn of War 2. I can imagine how they're making StarCraft.
Yeah.
2, which was like coming out around the same time, or an RPG, or I could totally see that. But I'm like, I don't know how they're making something like Mario Galaxy. Like I can't imagine the process they're using to make that game.
Right.
And I wanted to know. I felt like if I had had my master's, now I needed my PhD or whatever. And so I was like, if I'm going to leave Relic, which is one of the, I think, the top 50 game development studios in the world, I want to go somewhere that maybe has done it at a scale beyond, you know, and something less niche, something that I want to play in my free time.
Were you already a big Halo fan?
I wasn't a huge Halo fan. No,
Okay.
like I didn't own an Xbox. And I played an Xbox at my buddy's place. So I'd played Halo, of course, you know.
But that wasn't on your resume, though.
No, it was not.
With Bungie,
no.
You chose to not put that on.
Yeah, no, I left that off. And like, so I'd played the games, of course, and you know, actually playing the Halo 3 beta, which I guess came with Crackdown, if I remember correctly. I played that, and I was like, this beta is more polished than the shipping game I'm making right now. You know, and I'm like, there's something in the water there. They're doing something differently. You know, this was comparing, I think it was the outfit had just come out or whatever.
Right.
And I'm like, and that stuck with me. I'm like, wow, those guys, you know, Halo's incredible. And my first Halo was incredible to me. And then, you know, this beta was so good. I'm like, and so I kept that in the back of my mind. I'm like, that would be a place where I could learn. You know, like I'm like lifelong learning is something that's really important to me. Like I'm always just, you know, whether I'm reading a book or whatever, I'm just trying to always get better, right? And so that stayed with me. And then, so because of the THQ thing, because I wanted to do something other than RTS, and it didn't seem there was a future at Relic, I started kind of looking, you know. And again, GDC was at GDC Canada was at the convention center here.
Right,
you know, we did it one year, and went to one of the talks there, and there was a producer from Bungie talking about how like making a game is like kind of like building a plane while you're flying it, you know. And I was fascinated by the talk and connected with him and just shared emails and whatever, went back and forth for a couple months, and then a position opened up. He said, hey, do you think you'd ever be interested? And it just happened when I was kind of looking around, and you know, so again, the serendipitously, like just meeting someone at one of these conferences and just having a connection resulted in, you know, ultimately an interview, and then got the job.
Awesome. And Halo Reach obviously worked on a couple of different levels because it was kind of a swan song for Bungie. They were passing the baton to 343, but it was also a prequel. And it had amazing technology and an amazing story. What was working on that game like for you?
It was really eye-opening. You know, it came into a new studio that was you know, had more people working on a single game than Company Heroes. Company Heroes were 100, 120 people, and then Halo Reach was closer to 200. And so seeing the scale of the production was different, you know? And then just seeing how did that team operate? How were they structured, you know? How did the people sit together, you know? Like there were no cubicles. Like everyone was it was like an old Safeway. And imagine you took out all the groceries, of course, or like an old bowling lane or something, and it was inside there, and there was basically no walls, no offices, but everyone was kind of like clustered together in desks, and you could kind of just walk around through the desks. And so that first year for me, a lot of it was like studying, you know, thinking about like, how is this different than my experience at Relic? You know, how do we produce this differently? How do they come up with a story differently than we did at Relic? How does the mission get polished? Like how does, you know, like I remember one of the first versions of Reach I played, this was a year before the game shipped, was really polished, you know, like it was just fun to shoot things like already, and like it wasn't fun to shoot things in the outfit until like 2 months before we shipped, you know, and so it was like, well, that's because they've prioritized that. They said that the simulation of the action game is really, really important, and we need to make it run at 30 frames per second right away, you know, or there was dialogue in the game, and they didn't have real actors yet, but they had robot dialogue. So there was a program that would just read it back like a robot or whatever. And it wasn't good acting, but you could follow along with the story while you were playing. And so those were just like a couple subtle things I noticed right away.
So it became a process of iteration and tuning rather than building right up to the end and then leaving yourself very little time to iterate and tune.
And Bungie's like development process was really mature by the time we got to Halo Reach. This was the 5th Halo game they had made, you know? They were really good at making Halo at that point, you know? And so in a bunch of ways, it was kind of on easy mode, you know? Not for me, I wasn't super hard. I just mean in general, like the team was just really knew what they were doing. They knew how to make this type of content, you know, and to extend it, you know, and make it better. And There wasn't a bunch of savage crunching or overtime. There was people who stayed some late nights, but it wasn't anything you wouldn't expect you would do before you released a product that people are going to play for, hours and hours.
Well, you clearly at Bungie had something very special, so much so that Activision really stepped up and allowed Bungie the access to build an entirely brand new universe for us with Destiny. And right from the get-go, it was very bombastic, the marketing around this game. Obviously, a lot of expectation for the quality of it, but Activision was not shy about telling people how much money was being invested in Destiny's direction. Eric Hirschberg went out on stage and said, we've got $500 million behind this game. And I want to hear what that sounds like to the developers when they hear that number being floated around.
Yeah, it sounds awful.
Yeah.
Because it set a level of expectations for the game that were like, how can we possibly meet that? Like, at the time that was said, it was believed that like $100 million video game is like probably the most expensive game ever.
Yeah.
And this time's 5 times more expensive than the most expensive game ever.
Yes.
And so all your dreams will be realized forever in this game. It's GTA meets WoW meets Pokemon meets Harry Potter. Like it just
everybody gets their own Sparrow to ride in real life.
Yeah, put it everywhere.
Yes.
And so it was like, man, how do we live up to that?
Yeah.
And in a way, like part of the business of making games is the selling and promotion of games. And by saying that, ultimately it raised the profile for Destiny in mainstream ways that just saying there's a new game from the makers of Halo wouldn't. It would get Time Magazine writing an article, right? It would get The Guardian in the UK doing a thing, doing a cover story, or the Newsweek gave us a whole issue or whatever.
All press is good
and
press.
So, it certainly drove attention and eyeballs, but it also set expectations. Games. They can take a life of their own while you're building them.
Sure.
Sometimes you're working on something and you think it's this, but it's going to become something else. And it took us a while for the whole studio to really understand, like, what is this game becoming? What is it? What is it going to really play like? And I think there were people like Jason Jones, the originator of the original Halo and founder of Bungie, still at Bungie, and game director on the original. He knew what he wanted, and he would tell anyone who would listen. But when you get to a scale of hundreds of people, you get 14 steps away from Jason.
Right.
To what degree does that person understand really how this is going to work?
Right.
And when you're building a new technology on new platforms, and getting this all to integrate and work, when there's hundreds of people working on it, it just takes time. And it took us a long time to get to a place where we all really understood, okay, this is Destiny. Right, and this is actually how we should talk about it,
Right.
And now I think we get that. And it took a while for our players to understand that too. And it wasn't probably till our alpha that we did in 2014, where people were like, "Oh, okay, now we think we get it."
Yeah. Is there a military precision at Bungie? I mean, you're focusing on very heavy militarily themed video game entertainment, but is the way that you develop games kind of in that process? Do you have, generals and lieutenants and things like that? Do you have to run the company like that?
I wouldn't describe it that way, really at all. It's much more organic. We try to, certainly the way we're making Destiny now, we acknowledge that we're building a world. Right, like Bungie's purpose is to build worlds that connect people and create friendships. That's what we're trying to do. Every Bungie game is going to do that. And so we try to structure the team and the organization around building those worlds and building experiences. We're not trying just to make cool art and a game that runs really fast and shooting aliens being fun. We're trying to make ultimately like a world that you want to be in, a place that you can hang out and be, a place that can be your hobby, right? And so we structure the organization around that, and like, what is the right chain of decision making amongst the creative people to enable an experience to come together, right? And so we'll have like experience owners at different levels. Someone ultimately might own this set of 3 missions with a group of people that are all working with experts, and then their job is to deliver this, right? And that's part of a larger campaign, which is part of the larger world, which is part of this larger thing, and so. Yeah, we're really trying to build experiences, and sometimes the right structure for that changes over time. Like it's actually not rigid. You know, I think it's actually quite fluid. It's not changing from day to day, but the structure you have in concept development is very different than when you're in production with hundreds of people. Very different from where we are right now when we're closing the game.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's actually very fluid. And I think a thing that Bungie's really good at is constantly trying to learn and evolve and just get better, right? And so we're making Destiny 2, and we've been building it like in terms of how the team is organized and everything very differently from the original Destiny.
Now that you do have a wealth of knowledge and experience in the video game space, can you pass on some words of wisdom for people that are looking at launching themselves into the professional career?
Think of 2 tips. One is like, you need to create things, like make stuff, right? I didn't have that opportunity, or it wasn't as easy 15 years ago when I was trying to get in the industry. But now, like, the tools are at your fingertips, and the best way you're going to learn and get experience to be able to stand out is to actually make something. And the second thing is it's really a numbers game. You know, if you want to get into the games industry, meet as many people as you can in the games industry. Apply to as many places as you can in the games industry. Be nice to all those people. You know, remember their names, follow up with them, right? Find out if you don't get that interview, find out why, right? Yeah. If you did get the interview, it didn't go well, find out why. So the next place you can improve and do better. There's a guy, the producer at Bungie, started a few years ago, who applied like 6 times, you know, and would find out, borderline stalkerish, would find out when there was a Bungie person at a conference or something and meet that person and talk to them. And find out if there's any new positions that aren't on the website yet. And he went to another game design program somewhere in the U.S. And just kept trying. And eventually got an interview, did a full loop, and then we turned him down. It just wasn't the right time, you know. And then a year later, he's back. He's like, look, I've been working on those things you said. I'd really like another shot. I was just incredibly, incredibly persistent. And eventually they're like, look, I guess we just got to give this guy a job because he's not gonna give up, right? And now he's working on Destiny, and I think he thinks he loves it there. And so you got to be really persistent, but also be willing to, you just need to get your foot in the door. Like there's that vicious cycle of well, I don't have any experience, so I can't get the job. But they're only looking for people with experience. You've got to break it somehow, and making your own game is a way of breaking that. Or finding a job that isn't exactly the one you want, but the one maybe that you're qualified for is a way of like breaking that cycle. Or, stalking Bungie employees until they give you a job is a way of breaking that cycle.
But that's been done already, so yeah. I don't think people can do that one. Let's give it up for Mark Noseworthy. What a fantastic visit with you. Thank you, sir. That was great. And we are going to have a lot more from our VFS Confidential, but thank you all for joining us today. And let's hear it again for Mark Noseworthy. Thank you.